The thing about working in a restaurant that serves Miami's elite is that you learn to recognize power by the way it moves through a room. Michelle Heng had served senators, cartel lawyers, art dealers, whose collections never appeared in catalogs, and men whose names were whispered rather than spoken. But she had never seen someone command a space the way Alfonso Lombardi did that Thursday night in March. Not with volume, but with the kind of stillness that makes everyone else's breathing feel like an intrusion. By the time he looked up and caught the scent that shouldn't have existed anymore, Michelle's carefully constructed life had exactly 43 minutes left before it unraveled completely. Her shift at Casa di Verona began like every other Thursday evening with her arriving through the staff entrance at 5:12 p.m. 18 minutes before the restaurant opened its doors to the well-dressed and quietly dangerous. She pulled her dark hair into a French braid, the same style she'd worn since her mother taught her the technique 11 years ago, back when Elena's hands were steady and her eyes didn't carry that distant, frightened look that Michelle had learned not to ask about. The navy uniform fit her properly now, tailored last month after she'd finally saved enough from tips to stop wearing the standard issue version that hung shapeless on her frame. It was a small vanity, but in a place like Casa di Verona, where appearances were currency and discretion was survival, Michelle had learned that blending in required looking like you belonged, even when you didn't. The restaurant paid $16.50 an hour plus tips, which meant that in a good week, Michelle could clear $890 before taxes. Her apartment in Coral Terrace cost $1,340 monthly. A one-bedroom unit on the third floor of a building that was exactly 4.7 miles from the restaurant, a distance she covered on the bus, because car payments would have meant choosing between insurance and groceries. The math of her life was simple and unforgiving. She worked 62 hours across 6 shifts each week, splitting her time between Casa di Verona and a brunch cafe in Coconut Grove that catered to tourists who tipped in percentages rather than principals. What remained after rent went toward student loans from a nursing degree she'd abandoned halfway through, when her mother's medical situation had made finishing impossible, and later, after Elena's death 2 years ago, unnecessary. That morning, before her shift, Michelle had done what she did every Thursday morning for the past 26 months. She visited Woodlawn Park Cemetery, Section 12, Row 8, where her mother was buried under a modest granite marker that read simply, Elena Heng, Beloved Mother, 1972 to 2022. The visits happened 3 times each week, Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, a schedule Michelle maintained with the precision of someone who understood that consistency was the only promise she could still keep. She brought fresh flowers when she could afford them, supermarket carnations mostly, and when she couldn't, she simply sat on the stone bench 15 feet from the grave and talked. Today she had told her mother about the promotion she'd been offered, not at Casa di Verona, where positions were inherited rather than earned, but at the brunch cafe. A shift supervisor role that would mean an extra $200 per week, and the kind of responsibility Michelle wasn't sure she wanted. "What should I do, Mom?" she had asked the stone, the grass, the empty air that never answered back. The question hung there, the way all her questions did now, suspended in the space where guidance used to live. Her mother had been 37 when she died. Heart attack, the doctor said, though Michelle had always suspected it was something else, some deeper fracture that medicine couldn't name. Elena had been terrified in those final months, jumping at sounds that weren't there, checking the locks multiple times each night, refusing to say where she'd grown up or why she never spoke about Michelle's father. "Some things are safer not knowing," Elena had said once, during a rare moment of clarity in those morphine-hazed final weeks. "If anyone ever asks about our family, you tell them we came from nowhere and we're going nowhere. You understand me, Michelle?" Nowhere. Michelle hadn't understood. She still didn't. But she had nodded, because that's what you do when your mother is dying, and every word feels like it might be the last one. By the time Michelle returned to the present moment, to the restaurant's back corridor where the staff prepared for evening service, the memory had settled back into its familiar weight. She moved through the pre-shift routine with automatic grace. She collected her order pad and server's notebook from the small locker that held her belongings, mentally cataloging the evening's specials, pan-seared branzino with Meyer lemon and capers, house-made pappardelle with wild boar ragout, dry-aged ribeye with truffle butter. Casa di Verona was expecting a full house. The restaurant always filled on Thursdays when Miami's power brokers conducted the kind of business that required excellent wine and rooms without recording devices. The last thing Michelle did before taking her position on the floor was apply the perfume. She kept the bottle in her locker, wrapped in a silk scarf that had also belonged to her mother, though the perfume itself had come from further back in the family line. The vessel was crystal, cut with such precision that light fractured through it in geometric patterns, creating small rainbows against the locker's metal interior. The craftsmanship belonged to another era entirely. The kind of object you saw behind museum glass, rather than in the break room of a Miami restaurant. The label, handwritten in faded Italian script, read, Notturna di Firenze, 1997. Her mother had given it to her 3 weeks before she died, during one of those strange, lucid afternoons when the hospital room felt almost normal, almost like a conversation rather than a countdown. Elena had pressed the crystal bottle into Michelle's hands with surprising strength for someone so diminished by illness. "This is important," Elena had said, her voice carrying a weight that Michelle had learned meant, "Pay attention. Remember this exactly. This perfume, it came from my mother, from a place I can't tell you about, a life that ended before you were born." Michelle had turned the bottle in her hands, watching light move through the cut crystal. "Why are you giving this to me now?" "Because," Elena had paused, choosing words with visible effort, "because if anyone ever recognizes this scent, if someone knows what it is, where it came from, you'll understand things about our family, about why we live the way we did, about why I kept you hidden." "Hidden from what?" Elena's eyes had gone distant, the way they did when memory and morphine blurred together. "From a world that doesn't forget. From people who loved me, and people who wanted me dead. And Michelle, the terrible thing is, sometimes those were the same people. Mom, you're not making sense." "I know." Elena had smiled, sad and distant. "But you'll remember this conversation. One day it will make sense, and when it does, I need you to know, your life was never random. Everything I did, every lie I told, every place we never stayed, it was to keep you safe from a name that should have died with me." Michelle had wanted to press further, but the nurse had arrived, and by evening, Elena had slipped into unconsciousness. She never surfaced again. 3 days later, she was gone, and Michelle was alone with a crystal bottle and a warning she couldn't decode. She had worn the perfume only 3 times since then. Once to the funeral, once on the first anniversary of her mother's death, and once on a night last December when the loneliness had felt particularly vast, and she'd needed to feel close to something, anything, that connected her to a history she didn't understand. But tonight, for no reason she could clearly articulate, she had applied it before her shift. Just a small amount on her wrists and behind her ears, where her pulse beat visibly against her skin. The scent was unlike anything else she'd encountered. Not floral in any conventional way, though there was definitely something botanical at its heart, night-blooming jasmine, perhaps, or some Mediterranean flower that didn't have an English name. The base notes were warm and complex, amber, oud, something that reminded her of old libraries and churches that had stood for centuries. There was leather in there somewhere, or maybe aged wood, and underneath it all, a mineral quality, like stone warmed by sunlight. It was a scent designed to communicate history rather than simple beauty, a fragrance that seemed to carry memory in its molecular structure. Every time Michelle breathed, she detected something new, as if the perfume were a small symphony that kept rearranging itself. By 6:00 p.m., the dining room had filled to about half capacity. Michelle moved through her section with the fluid precision of someone who had internalized the choreography of service so completely that her body managed it while her mind wandered elsewhere. She poured water at exact angles. She presented menus with her left hand, keeping her right free for immediate needs. She recommended the branzino to guests who wanted to seem sophisticated without taking actual risks, and she made herself invisible in the way that excellent servers do, present enough to anticipate needs, absent enough not to intrude on conversations that weren't meant for her ears. It was during the third hour of service, around 7:35 p.m., that Giovanni, the maitre d', appeared at her elbow. This was unusual enough that Michelle almost didn't register it at first. Giovanni rarely spoke to servers directly. He communicated through glances and small gestures, conducting the dining room like a silent orchestra. "Table 12, he said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that nearby diners wouldn't hear. "The gentleman who just arrived in the corner booth. He dines here once, maybe twice per year. Always the same table, always alone. You'll bring him a bottle of the 2015 Barolo from the reserve cellar, the one we don't put on the menu. You'll open it at the table. You'll take his order, but you won't make small talk, you understand?" Michelle nodded, though her pulse had quickened slightly. "Should I know who he is?" Giovanni's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Caution, perhaps, or the particular wariness of someone who'd learned not to ask certain questions. "You don't need to know. You just need to be professional. And Michelle?" He paused. "Don't linger." She followed Giovanni's discreet gesture toward the back corner of the dining room. Casa di Verona's corner booths were designed for Miami's version of privacy, visible enough to signal importance, isolated enough to prevent eavesdropping. The booth in question was positioned beneath a Venetian mirror and a painting of the Italian coast, the table set with the restaurant's finest linens, and the small brass lamp that indicated a VIP reservation. The man seated there wore a dark suit that probably cost more than Michelle's annual rent, the fabric moving like liquid as he settled into the booth. A fedora rested on the seat beside him. His posture was relaxed, but completely aware, the kind of stillness that suggested he was accustomed to being watched and unbothered by it. He hadn't looked up yet, his attention focused on the wine list, but even from across the room, Michelle could feel the way the space bent around him, the way nearby conversations lowered in volume without the speakers realizing why. She collected the Barolo from the reserve cellar, checked that the bottle was the correct vintage, and approached table 12 with the smooth, unhurried pace that Casa di Verona trained into its staff. As she drew closer, moving through the space between occupied tables, the air shifted. She noticed it first as a change in temperature, then as something subtler, an awareness, sharp and sudden, like the moment before lightning strikes. The man looked up, and everything stopped. The silence that followed Alfonso Lombardi's command wasn't immediate. It moved through Casa di Verona like a physical thing, spreading from table to table in concentric circles of confusion, then recognition, then compliance. A fork stopped halfway to a mouth. A wineglass settled back onto linen. Conversations died mid-sentence, the words simply ceasing to exist, as though they'd never been spoken at all. Giovanni appeared first, moving with the swift efficiency of someone who understood that certain orders were not requests. He gestured to the servers, to the sommelier, to the guests who were already reaching for jackets and purses, with the practiced speed of people who knew better than to question what they didn't understand. Within 90 seconds, the dining room was emptying. Within 2 minutes, it was empty, so... Michelle stood frozen 3 feet from table 12, the bottle of Barolo still in her hands, her mind unable to process what was happening. She watched the last guests disappear through the entrance, watched Giovanni pull the heavy doors closed behind them, watched the restaurant transform from Miami's most exclusive dining room into something else entirely. A stage, a confessional, a trap. Then it was just the two of them. The silence was so complete she could hear the kitchen fans humming through the walls, could hear her own breathing, too fast, too shallow. Alfonso Lombardi sat motionless, his hands flat on the white tablecloth. He was staring at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, as though he were trying to see through her, past her, into some dimension where answers lived. His face was composed, handsome in a weathered way, probably mid-50s, with the kind of features that suggested Mediterranean ancestry, but his eyes were wrong. They held something between recognition and devastation, the look of a man watching a dead thing rise from its grave. "Where did you get that perfume?" His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Not a question. A demand wrapped in courtesy. Michelle's throat felt tight. It's just perfume. I don't... Where?" The single word cracked through the air like a gunshot. She flinched, her grip tightening on the wine bottle. "It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died." Something shifted in Alfonso's expression. His jaw tightened, his eyes closed for one long breath. When he opened them again, the devastation had sharpened into something more dangerous. Focus. "Your mother's name." It wasn't a question this time either. "I don't see why." "Tell me her name." He was standing now, rising from the booth with liquid grace, closing the distance between them. Not threatening, exactly, but utterly unavoidable. Michelle took a step back, her spine hitting the edge of an empty table. Elena Heng. Her full name. His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Her birth name. The question stopped her. Birth name. No one had ever asked about that before, because no one knew. But her mother had told her once, years ago, during a conversation Michelle had half forgotten. "Before I came to America, I had a different name, a different life. Ferraro," Michelle heard herself say. "Elena Ferraro Heng. But I don't know where she..." Alfonso made a sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a groan. He turned away from her, one hand coming up to his face, and for a moment, Michelle thought he might actually collapse. His shoulders rose and fell with breathing that had become suddenly labored. When he turned back, his eyes were wet. "Impossible," he whispered. "She died. I identified..." He stopped himself, visibly wrestling for control. "The perfume. Let me see the bottle." "No." The word came out before Michelle could think. "I don't know what's happening here, but I need to leave." "You can't." Alfonso's hand shot out, not grabbing her, but blocking her path. "That scent. It was created for one woman, my mother, Isabella Ferraro. It was custom-made in 1995 by a perfumer in Florence. The formula was destroyed after her death. No one else should have it. No one." Michelle's heart was hammering now. "I don't know anything about that. My mother gave it to me. That's all I know." "Your mother, Elena," Alfonso's voice fractured on the name. "She was my sister. My younger sister. She was supposed to have died 20 years ago in Florence, in the bombing that killed our mother. I saw the reports. I saw the..." He stopped, his hands trembling now. "How old are you?" 24. "Why does... Cristo..." Alfonso's face had gone pale. 24. That means Elena was alive until... When did she die? 2 years ago. But she never mentioned. She never said anything about a brother, about Italy, about... because she was hiding. Alfonso's words came faster now, pieces clicking together in his mind, a puzzle solving itself in real time. She was hiding from the family. From the war that followed, from everything. She survived, and she ran, and she... His eyes locked on Michelle's with sudden, fierce intensity. "You need to come with me. Now." "Absolutely not." Michelle moved sideways, trying to circle around him. "I don't know you. I don't know what you think this means, but... it means you're in danger." Alfonso's voice cut through her protest like a blade. "If anyone else recognizes that scent, if anyone else makes the connection..." The restaurant's front door opened. 2 men in dark suits entered without knocking, their posture suggesting they were accustomed to entering places without permission. Alfonso's men, clearly, summoned by some silent signal Michelle hadn't seen. She felt panic spike, bright and sharp. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice shaking. "Right now." Alfonso raised one hand, a simple gesture, but the 2 men stopped immediately. He looked at Michelle, and something in his expression softened fractionally. Some recognition of her terror. "You're under my protection now," he said quietly. "Whether you understand that or not, whether you want it or not, someone will watch your apartment tonight. Don't be afraid of them. Be afraid of what happens if they're not there. You can't just..." "I can. I am." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a card, heavy stock, embossed with a phone number and nothing else. "When you're ready to understand what that perfume means, call me. You have 72 hours before I stop asking politely." Michelle snatched the card, turned, and fled. She didn't stop until she was 3 blocks away, standing at a bus stop under the amber glow of streetlights, her hands still shaking. The perfume bottle was in her purse, the crystal facets catching the reflection of passing headlights. Behind her, somewhere in the warm Miami night, the most dangerous man in the city was making phone calls that would reshape her entire life. She just didn't know it yet. Michelle didn't sleep that night. She sat on her apartment's small balcony overlooking the street, watching a black Mercedes that had been parked across from her building since 11:47 p.m. The men inside hadn't moved, hadn't left, just sat there, silent sentinels against threats she couldn't name. At 8:15 a.m., a different car arrived. A town car, sleek and black, idling at the curb. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The car will wait. We need to talk." A.L. She should have ignored it. Should have called the police, her manager, someone who existed in the normal world where waitresses didn't get summoned by men who emptied restaurants with 2 words. But the perfume bottle sat on her nightstand, catching morning light, and her mother's warning echoed in her mind. "If someone recognizes this scent, you'll understand things about our family." Against every instinct that told her to run, Michelle got in the car. The drive took 32 minutes, northeast through Coral Gables and into a neighborhood where the houses hid behind walls, and money moved in silence. The gate that opened for them was wrought iron, 12 feet tall, topped with security cameras disguised as decorative finials. The mansion beyond it was Mediterranean revival, all creamstone and terracotta. Beautiful in the way that museums are beautiful, designed to be admired from a distance, not lived in. Alfonso met her at the door. He looked like he hadn't slept either. The suit was different but equally expensive, the fedora absent, revealing silver-threaded dark hair, combed back from a face that carried the particular exhaustion of a man who'd spent the night confronting ghosts. "Thank you for coming," he said, and stood aside. The interior was exactly as cold as Michelle had imagined. Marble floors that echoed footsteps, vaulted ceilings that swallowed sound, furniture that looked original to whatever European estate it had been imported from. All dark wood and brocade, more museum pieces than places to sit. But it was the portraits that stopped her, a gallery of them lining the entrance hall, faces staring down from ornate frames. Women in evening gowns, men in military uniforms, children who would never grow old. "My family," Alfonso said quietly, following her gaze. "Most of them are dead now, by violence, by time, by the particular entropy that follows our bloodline." He led her through the house to a study that smelled of old leather and older regrets. A grand piano stood in the corner, its surface dusty, clearly untouched for years. The desk was covered in folders, photographs, documents that looked like they'd been pulled from archives and spread out in desperate sequence. "I didn't sleep," Alfonso said, not quite an apology. "I spent the night proving to myself I wasn't losing my mind." He picked up a photograph, held it out to her. "This is why." Michelle took it with trembling fingers. The photograph was old, the colors slightly faded, dated 1995 in the corner. It showed 3 people on a terrace overlooking what might have been Florence. The Duomo, visible in the distance, soft, with afternoon light. A woman in her early 40s, dark-haired and elegant, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Michelle's yearly rent. A boy, maybe 13, serious-faced and already carrying the weight of expectation in his posture. And a girl, no more than 7 or 8, laughing at something outside the frame, her features bright with uncomplicated joy. Michelle's hands went numb. The girl was her, not just similar, identical. The same dark eyes, the same shape of face, the same expression Michelle had seen in her own childhood photographs, back when her mother could still afford cameras and birthday parties. "That's Elena," Alfonso said softly. "My sister. That's my mother, Isabella. And that's me, 3 years before I watched them both die." "Except they didn't," Michelle whispered. "Elena didn't." "No. She survived. She ran. She changed her name, fled to America, built a life I knew nothing about." His voice carried something between anger and grief. "She had you, raised you alone, kept you hidden from everyone, including me." "Why?" Michelle couldn't look away from the photograph, from the ghost of her mother's childhood. "Why would she hide?" Alfonso's expression darkened. He picked up another document, old, official-looking, stamped with Italian government seals. "Because the bombing that killed our mother wasn't ordered by rivals. It was ordered by our father, Giancarlo Lombardi." The room felt suddenly airless. "Why would he?" "Because Isabella had an affair." Alfonso's words were precise. Clinical, the tone of someone who'd spent 20 years building walls around this truth. "With a man from outside the family, outside the life, a civilian, an art dealer named Marco Ferraro. The same man who became Elena's protector, the same man who, if my research is correct, became your grandfather." Michelle's vision blurred. The photograph trembled in her hands. "You're saying your father killed his own wife because she loved someone else, because she tried to leave, because in our world, love is a weakness, and weakness is answered with fire." Alfonso's jaw tightened. Elena was supposed to die with her, but someone, Marco probably, got her out, faked her death, helped her disappear. "And my mother never told me any of this." "Because telling you would have made you a target." Alfonso moved to the window, his silhouette dark against the Miami sunlight. "Our family doesn't forget, doesn't forgive. If anyone had known Elena survived, that she had a child—" He didn't finish, didn't need to. Michelle stood, the perfume bottle suddenly heavy in her purse. The weight of it, the history it carried, felt like it might pull her through the floor. "I need to leave." "Michelle, no!" She was moving toward the door, her breathing shallow. I can't." He didn't try to stop her, just stood there, watching her flee, with the same exhausted recognition of someone who'd watched everyone he loved disappear, one way or another. "I'll keep you safe," he said as she reached the threshold, "whether you believe me or not." Michelle didn't answer. She just ran, out through the cold marble halls, past the portraits of the dead, into the waiting car that would take her back to a life that no longer made sense. Behind her, Alfonso Lombardi stood alone in his museum of ghosts, holding a photograph of a sister he'd mourned for 20 years, and silently made a promise to the empty room. "This time, I won't lose her daughter too." Alfonso Lombardi had built an empire on information. He knew which politicians kept mistresses in Aventura condos, which bankers laundered cartel money through art acquisitions, which judges had gambling debts that made them pliable. But the file spread across his desk at 3:42 a.m. contained information he'd never thought to look for, because you don't search for ghosts you've already buried. His men had worked through the night, pulling records from sources that didn't officially exist. What they found was a paper trail that led backward through 20 years of carefully obscured transactions, each one designed to hide a simple, impossible truth. Someone had been paying for Michelle Heng's upbringing since she was 4 years old. The money had moved through a maze of shell corporations and offshore accounts, but the destination was always the same, a charitable foundation called the Isabella Foundation, established in 2003, which made quarterly payments to cover private school tuition, medical expenses, and eventually a modest trust that had helped Elena Heng afford her daughter's early childhood. Alfonso stared at the bank statements, his mind working through the implications. The foundation had been managed by his accountant, Salvatore Russo, a man who'd handled the Lombardi family finances for 30 years. The payments had been small enough to hide in the noise of legitimate charitable giving, large enough to make a difference in a single mother's life. Figlio di puttana, Alfonso whispered. He'd been protecting her for years without knowing it, or someone had been using his money to protect her. Either possibility felt like standing on sand. At 9:15 a.m., Rico Santoro arrived at the estate. Rico was 73, one of the few men who'd served Alfonso's father and lived to serve the son. He moved slowly now, arthritis settling into joints that had once moved with brutal efficiency, but his eyes were still sharp. "You wanted to see me," Rico said, settling into the chair across from Alfonso's desk without being invited. Old men who'd earned their survival didn't wait for permission. Alfonso slid the bank statements across the desk. "The Isabella Foundation. Tell me about it." Rico's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition. Maybe resignation. He picked up the papers, scanned them with the careful attention of someone who already knew what they said. "Your father established it," Rico said finally. "After Isabella died, he wanted—" Rico paused, choosing words with visible care. He wanted to make amends, in his way. Amends for murdering his wife? Amends for what the murder cost. Elena disappeared. Your father spent years looking for her. Not to kill her, Alfonso. To know she was safe. When we finally found her in Miami, 18 years ago, she had a daughter. 4 years old. Living in a one-bedroom apartment in Little Havana, barely making rent. Alfonso's hands had gone cold. You knew. All this time, you knew Elena was alive. Your father knew. He made me promise never to tell you. Said you'd... Rico stopped, reading Alfonso's expression correctly. Said you'd do exactly what you're doing now. Tear everything apart, trying to fix what can't be fixed. He had me fund my own niece's upbringing without telling me she existed. He thought it was mercy, letting her live a normal life, away from the family, away from the violence, away from men like us. Rico's voice carried the weight of too many years, too many compromises. Your father was a monster, Alfonso, but even monsters have moments of conscience. Alfonso stood, moved to the window. Outside, Miami gleamed in morning sunlight, beautiful and indifferent. Who else knows about Michelle? Rico's silence was answer enough. Chi? Alfonso's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than shouting ever could. Salvatore knows. He managed the accounts. And if Salvatore knows, Rico didn't finish. I didn't need to. Salvatore Russo had disappeared 3 days ago, his penthouse empty, his files missing. He sold her, Alfonso said quietly. Not a question. Information is currency. Michelle Heng is Elena Ferraro's daughter, the last living connection to Isabella. There are people who would pay well for that knowledge, people who remember the old war, who lost family in what followed. Across the city, Michelle sat on her apartment floor, surrounded by her mother's remaining belongings. She'd gone through them before, of course, after Elena died, sorting what to keep from what to donate. But she'd been looking for memories then, not answers. Now she looked for lies. The perfume box had a false bottom. She discovered it by accident, the velvet lining catching on her fingernail, peeling back to reveal a small compartment beneath. Inside, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, covered in her mother's handwriting. Michelle's hands trembled as she unfolded it. My dearest Michelle, if you're reading this, someone has recognized the perfume, which means everything I've done to keep you hidden has failed. The scent is your grandmother Isabella's, a woman you'll never meet, from a family you must never claim. I gave it to you because it's the only beautiful thing from that life, and you deserve to carry something beautiful. But beauty in our family is always dangerous. If anyone recognizes this scent, run. Don't ask questions. Don't seek answers. Don't trust anyone who claims to protect you. Protection in the Lombardi family is just another word for prison. I loved you enough to lie to you for 24 years. Please love me enough to stay alive. Mom. Michelle was still holding the letter when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Michelle Heng? A man's voice. Accented. Unfamiliar. Who is this? Someone who knows what you are, what you're worth. You have 24 hours to disappear, or everyone you've ever spoken to becomes collateral. The line went dead. Outside her window, the black Mercedes was gone. For a moment, Michelle stood there, the curtains brushing her wrist, listening to the slow rhythm of rain against the glass. The night was too still, the kind of stillness that made you aware of your own breathing. She pressed her palm to the cold pane, half expecting the headlights to reappear, but the street remained dark, washed in the faint orange glow of a distant street lamp. By morning, the unease hadn't lifted. She tried to return to her routine: coffee, voicemail, the thin toast that never filled her, but everything tasted wrong. When her phone buzzed at 10:17 a.m. with an unknown number, she nearly ignored it. But something, curiosity, instinct, maybe fate, made her answer. Miss Heng. The voice was male, low, too polite. This is Special Agent Rhodes with the FBI. We'd like to talk about a man named Alfonso Lombardi. Her grip tightened around the phone. I think you have the wrong person, she managed. No, he said. We don't. They met that afternoon at a nondescript federal building in Brickell. The walls were gray, the lighting sterile. Rhodes was tall, mid-40s, the kind of man who seemed carved out of procedure. His partner, Agent Morgan, didn't speak much. She just watched. Rhodes slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, grainy surveillance stills of Alfonso entering his mansion, stepping out of a car, shaking hands with men Michelle had seen once or twice at Casa di Verona. Do you know this man? He asked. Michelle hesitated. He's a customer, that's all. Rhodes nodded, almost sympathetic. He's also the head of one of the most powerful crime networks in the country. We've been investigating him for years, but recently his pattern changed. He's protecting someone. He turned the next page. It was a still from a restaurant camera. Michelle, serving Alfonso wine. The moment his eyes were closed, the air between them electric. He's protecting you. Her throat went dry. That's absurd. Is it? Rhodes leaned forward. Your mother, Elena Heng. She testified against one of Lombardi's associates years ago, a man named Santoro. After that, she disappeared. We believe Alfonso had her silenced. Michelle flinched as though struck. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, we do, he said gently. And now, he's found her daughter. You. Do you know what that means? She stared at the photo until her own reflection blurred it. What do you want from me? Help us bring him down, Rhodes said. You're already close. He trusts you. If you let us monitor your next meeting, recordings, GPS, we can end this, safely. Safely. The word hung like a lie. That night, Michelle sat at her small kitchen table with her mother's perfume in front of her. The vial caught the light, refracting it into pale gold. She thought of Alfonso's voice, low and cracked with regret. You remind me of someone I failed to save. She didn't know who to believe anymore, the law that twisted truth into leverage, or the man who could destroy her with a single command but hadn't. At midnight, she texted a number she'd memorized but never saved. We need to talk, tomorrow. Casa di Verona. The reply came instantly. It's not safe there, but I'll come. By the next evening, the restaurant was dark, its windows covered for renovation. The air smelled of varnish and dust, the faint ghosts of wine and laughter long gone. Michelle entered through the side door, her steps echoing on the marble. Alfonso was already there, standing in the center of the empty dining room, no hat tonight, sleeves rolled up, a bottle of Barolo on a paint-spattered table beside him. His eyes found her immediately, softening, then sharpening, like he'd been preparing for this conversation all day. "You shouldn't have called me here," he said quietly. "I needed answers." He nodded once. "Then ask." Michelle hesitated, then said, "The FBI came to me. They said my mother testified against your family, that she was killed for it." Alfonso's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes flickered. Pain, maybe shame. "They're not entirely wrong," he said. "But they don't understand what happened." He moved closer, the distance between them closing like a trap. "When I was young, I thought loyalty meant obedience. My father taught me that. He also taught me to bury emotion under control. But when my mother and sister died..." His voice caught. A rare fracture. "It was my silence that killed them, not the gunfire." Michelle's breath trembled. "You mean my mother, Elena? She didn't betray you?" "No," Alfonso said, staring past her as if seeing ghosts. "She ran, and I let her. I thought it was mercy. I told myself she'd build a life far from all this, but guilt doesn't dissolve. It follows you, generation to generation." He looked at her now. "You wear it. I see it every time you breathe in that perfume." Michelle wanted to hate him, to blame him, but the truth had no shape she could hold. The man before her was both villain and victim, her mother's destroyer and protector. "You're saying you searched for her?" "For years," he said softly. "Not for the family's honor, for myself. I wanted to apologize, but by the time I found a lead, she was gone. I thought that was my punishment." Silence thickened. The air hummed with everything unsaid. Then Michelle whispered, "You think guilt is punishment. It's not. It's inheritance." Alfonso almost smiled, a sad, tired thing. "Then we share the same blood." Before she could answer, a noise cracked the stillness, a dull pop, like a champagne cork. Then another. Glass exploded near the window. Michelle ducked instinctively as Alfonso grabbed her arm and dragged her behind an overturned table. Gunfire erupted outside, echoing through the empty hall. Alfonso's men, posted discreetly nearby, shouted commands in Italian. "Who is it?" Michelle gasped. "Not the FBI," Alfonso growled. "Worse." The restaurant shook with the sound of bullets. Plaster rained from the ceiling. Michelle's heart slammed against her ribs as Alfonso drew his pistol, eyes scanning the windows. "You brought them here," he said, not accusingly, but with grim realization. She shook her head violently. "I didn't. I swear. I know." He glanced at her, eyes softer now. "That's why you need to live." He moved before she could stop him, sliding out from cover, firing twice toward the doorway. The shots roared through the restaurant, drowning her scream. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Michelle pressed herself against the floor, trembling, as the familiar scent of her perfume mingled with gunpowder. Somewhere between fear and disbelief, she understood. Whatever trap she'd stepped into, it had never been hers alone. The gunfire didn't stop. It only got closer. The sharp crack of bullets tore through the restaurant's glass facade, scattering fragments of crystal and light across the marble floor. Michelle screamed as Alfonso pulled her down, shoving her behind the long granite counter. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, varnish, and fear. "Stay low," he barked. The windows burst in sequence, glass raining down like shattered stars. Alfonso drew his weapon, moving with practiced precision, each motion clean, purposeful, terrifyingly calm. Michelle crouched beside him, her pulse hammering so hard she thought her ribs might break. From somewhere beyond the door, tires screeched. A black SUV blocked the narrow street outside. Muzzle flashes burst from its tinted windows. Alfonso fired back 3 controlled shots. One found its mark. The sound of a man collapsing echoed through the entryway. Then came silence, a false, heavy silence. Alfonso glanced at her, breathing hard. "Can you move?" Michelle nodded, though her legs trembled. "Good. When I say run, you run through the kitchen. Don't stop." "What about you?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He just reloaded. The next volley hit harder. Bottles behind the bar exploded, the scent of red wine and shattered corks filling the air. Michelle ducked lower as a shard grazed her arm, leaving a thin ribbon of blood. Alfonso noticed. His expression flashed with fury, then fear. "Stay with me," he said, voice rough. Another blast, another impact. Michelle felt him move. His body pressed against hers, shielding her as bullets tore through the counter. She could feel his breath near her ear, ragged, hot with adrenaline. "Your mother died protecting a secret I couldn't face," he whispered fiercely. "I won't lose you the same way." She didn't know whether to cry or scream. The world had narrowed to his heartbeat against her shoulder and the smell of gunfire. Then, suddenly, a new sound cut through the chaos. Engines, multiple. Alfonso's men. 3 dark-suited figures burst through the side entrance, firing with brutal precision. The attackers outside answered in kind, but their shots faltered as Lombardi's reinforcements advanced. Alfonso rose halfway, firing toward the door again. One bullet caught his shoulder, spinning him sideways. "Alfonso!" Michelle caught him before he hit the floor. His blood ran warm across her hands. He gritted his teeth. "It's nothing. Move." "No, it's not nothing." He seized her wrist, pulling her toward the kitchen. "Move!" They sprinted through the narrow corridor, the restaurant behind them dissolving into noise and smoke. The kitchen lights flickered wildly, pots and pans clattering to the tile as they ran. Michelle's shoes slipped on broken glass. Alfonso's blood trailed behind them, dark against the floor. The back door burst open to the alley. Rain pounded the pavement. Alfonso stumbled, gripping his shoulder. "Get in the car." "But you're—" He turned, eyes fierce. "Now, Michelle." The command snapped through her like electricity. She obeyed, throwing herself into the driver's seat of a waiting black sedan. Alfonso slid in beside her, gun still in hand. He slumped against the seat, face pale but steady. "Drive," he said. Michelle's hands shook as she started the engine. The tires screamed against wet asphalt as they sped into the night. Behind them, Casa di Verona burned. Flames licked at the shattered windows, devouring the elegant restaurant that had once been her world. She glanced at him. His suit was soaked through, the fabric dark where blood spread from his shoulder. His eyes were half closed, his breathing uneven. "Stay awake," she said. "Talk to me." He gave a faint, crooked smile. "You drive like your mother." That single line pierced her like glass. "You knew her that well?" His voice dropped to a rasp. "She believed running would save you. I let her go because I thought that was mercy. But guilt doesn't die, Michelle. It grows. Tonight was proof." She didn't answer. She couldn't. The rain blurred the windshield, streaking red from the reflection of distant sirens. "They found us," she whispered. "They were always going to," he said. "You walked into the middle of a war that never ended." When the first police cruiser appeared in her rearview mirror, she almost swerved. Alfonso turned his head weakly toward her. "Don't stop. They're not here to protect you." Her breath hitched. "You're saying they'll arrest you and you'll disappear before morning." The weight of that truth sank deep. She pressed harder on the accelerator. Minutes blurred into eternity. The rain, the lights, the sound of his shallow breathing, all of it fused into a single pulse of movement and dread. Finally, the iron gates of Alfonso's estate came into view, rising out of the dark like a fortress. 2 guards opened them without hesitation. Michelle drove straight through, tires spraying gravel as she pulled up to the front steps. She jumped out and ran to his side, yanking the door open. He tried to stand, failed, and half collapsed into her arms. "Easy," she said, voice shaking. "I've got you." They made it to the marble foyer, her shoulder beneath his weight. One of his men rushed forward, but Alfonso waved him off. "No doctor, not here." "Then where?" Michelle snapped. He looked at her with a strange, tired calm. "Inside. In my study." They stumbled down the corridor lined with portraits, faces of men and women who shared his blood, his empire, his sins. The smell of smoke still clung to him, mixed with that faint trace of her perfume. In the study, she lowered him onto the couch. He unbuttoned his shirt with one hand, revealing the wound, a deep graze through his shoulder. Blood still seeped, but he didn't flinch. "Get the drawer," he said. She found it. Bandages, alcohol, a gun. Her hands trembled as she cleaned the wound, her tears mixing with the antiseptic. He watched her quietly. "You shouldn't be here. Neither should you," she whispered. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "You had every chance to walk away. So did you." For a moment, neither spoke. The storm outside raged against the windows. Then Alfonso reached out, catching her wrist. His fingers were warm, unsteady. "You crossed the line tonight, Michelle. You're one of us now. No law, no witness. Just truth and blood." She looked down at his wound, then at her blood-stained hands. The perfume on her wrist still lingered faintly beneath the iron smell of violence. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Outside, the sirens wailed closer, but inside the estate, there was only silence. The kind that follows when two people realize that whatever innocence existed between them has just died. Alfonso's men had arrived within 6 minutes of Michelle's call. By the time the sun set over Biscayne Bay, she was standing on the deck of a yacht that cost more than she'd earn in 3 lifetimes, watching Miami's glittering skyline recede into darkness. The Isabella cut through black water with barely a sound, engines purring beneath her feet as they moved past the shipping lanes into open ocean. No surveillance here. No phones, no threats that couldn't be seen coming across empty horizons. Alfonso stood at the bow, his suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked smaller out here, somehow, stripped of the mansion, the men, the infrastructure of power that insulated him from ordinary human vulnerability. Just a man standing beneath stars that had watched his family destroy itself. Michelle approached slowly, the yacht's movement steadying beneath her. "How far are we going?" "Far enough." He didn't turn. "The people looking for you can't reach us here. Not tonight." She stood beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling air. The silence between them felt different now. Not hostile, not frightened, just tired. "I knew," Alfonso said finally, his voice barely audible over the water. "About my father. About what he did. I've known for 15 years. Michelle's breath caught. "I found proof in his files after he died, contracts, payments to the men who planted the bomb, records of Isabella's affair, surveillance photos, evidence he'd built his case like a prosecutor before he executed his own wife." Alfonso's hands gripped the railing. "And I did nothing, kept the family name, kept the empire he built on her ashes because I was a coward." "You were his son," Michelle whispered. "I was a coward," he repeated, harder this time. "I searched for Elena's child, for you, not out of love, out of guilt, thinking if I could find you, protect you from a distance, it might balance the scales somehow, might make me less complicit in what he did." He reached beneath his collar, pulled out a gold chain Michelle had glimpsed but never questioned. The pendant was small, delicate, a crystal capsule no larger than her thumb, sealed with gold filigree. Inside, a single drop of amber liquid caught the starlight. "The original perfume," Alfonso said, placing it in her hands. "My mother wore it the day she died. I took this from her dressing table before they destroyed everything. Before my father erased her." Michelle's fingers closed around the pendant, still warm from his skin. "You carry the only part of her that survived me," Alfonso's voice broke, finally, the control he'd maintained for decades fracturing like glass. "Don't let it die in hate. Don't let what I failed to do define what you become." She looked up at him, this dangerous man, this broken son, this uncle she'd never known, and saw her own grief reflected back. Two bloodlines that should have protected each other, meeting instead across decades of silence and violence. "I don't know how to forgive this," Michelle whispered. "Neither do I," Alfonso said. "But maybe that's not what we're supposed to do. Maybe we just carry it, together. Above them." The same stars that had watched Isabella Ferraro die now watched her granddaughter and son stand side by side, bound by blood and ghosts, and the scent of a perfume that refused to fade. 6 weeks after the yacht returned to harbor, Alfonso Lombardi walked into the FBI's Miami field office and dismantled an empire. He came alone, without lawyers, without the infrastructure of power that had insulated him from consequences for 30 years. The deal he struck was surgical. Names, locations, financial records that would collapse 3 rival families and expose corruption reaching into city government, federal courts, and banks whose marble lobbies had never seen handcuffs. In exchange, one condition. Michelle Heng's name would never appear in any file, testimony, or record. She would remain what Elena had died trying to make her, invisible. The news broke on Thursday. By Friday, the arrests had begun. By the following week, Miami's criminal landscape had been redrawn entirely, power vacuums filled with scrambling ambition and calculated violence that would take years to settle. Michelle watched it unfold from a distance, sitting in her apartment with the television muted, seeing Alfonso's face in courtroom footage, composed, unreachable, already gone. Casa di Verona reopened quietly 3 weeks later under new management. The official story involved a private investment group, anonymous benefactors, with interest in preserving Miami's culinary heritage. The staff returned to their positions. The kitchen resumed its meticulous choreography. Everything looked the same. Michelle's first shift back felt like walking through a memory. The same tables, the same lighting, the same wealthy diners conducting business over wine that cost more than rent. But table 12 remained empty now, marked with a small, reserved placard that was never moved. When she opened her locker before service, something caught the light. A crystal bottle, new but crafted in the same antique style as her mother's. Beside it, a card in precise handwriting. The scent is legacy, not curse. You were never meant to hide it. A.L. Michelle lifted the bottle, feeling its weight, its history, its impossible promise. Inside, the same amber liquid that had started everything. She uncapped it slowly, applied a single drop to her wrist. The scent bloomed in the small space. Amber, oud, night-blooming jasmine, memory made tangible. Through the locker room door, she could hear the restaurant filling, voices rising and falling like tides. Outside the building, sirens wailed past on Biscayne Boulevard, the city's constant soundtrack of crime and consequence bleeding into the sound of waves against the nearby shore. Michelle looked at her reflection in the locker's small mirror. Same face, different woman, carrying ghosts that no longer owned her. She closed the locker and walked onto the floor, the perfume trailing behind her like an invisible banner, no longer hidden, no longer afraid. When he said, "Everyone out," he wasn't clearing a room. He was clearing a past that could no longer hide its scent.